They gave us The Dirty Dozen and Cat Ballou. But the most defining battle Lee Marvin ever fought was off-screen against stars like Clint Eastwood and Bert Lancaster. Prepare for the shocking truth behind the 7 unforgivable sins that put Hollywood royalty on the veteran's permanent blacklist. Lee Marvin, the last soldier of Hollywood. The silver screen of Hollywood's golden age was built on heroes, men of rugged charm and easy smiles. But only one of them had truly crawled through the mud and faced the peril of a real war. That man was Lee Marvin, and until his final breath, he carried an unshakable contempt for those who wore fame like a costume. Lee Marvin, the legendary film icon, earned the moniker the last soldier of Hollywood for his uncompromising nature. He lived with the clarity of a soldier, always ready to confront. Off-screen, he never hesitated to call them out. "I'd rather hang up my gun and leave the screen," he once declared, "than stand next to a fake hero." The unshakable contempt. This honesty fueled a notorious feud against 7 of Hollywood's biggest names, including John Wayne, Frank Sinatra, and Clint Eastwood. These were legends, yet Marvin saw fatal flaws. The false heroism of the icon, the rotten ego of the singer, the silent pride of the star, the careless disrespect for the craft, and the flawless artifice of the new guard. This deep, visceral hatred was the fundamental driving force behind his professional isolation, turning his unyielding personal principles into permanent, high-stakes barriers that dictated his entire controversial trajectory in Tinseltown and ensured he would forever remain an uncompromising outsider looking in. The war record Marvin abandoned school and enlisted in the Marine Corps when World War II erupted. It was during the brutal Battle of Saipan that the star was truly forged. There, he was struck by machine gun fire, suffered a severe sciatic nerve injury, and was eventually awarded the Purple Heart. This experience transformed him into an actor who didn't need to perform. His fierce glare emerged from deeply felt memories. His combat tour instilled a code where honor and accountability were the only currency. A code he demanded Hollywood respect, viewing any professional or ethical deviation as a profound moral failure and a personal affront to the men who didn't come home and whose ultimate sacrifices were diminished by the industry's pervasive frivolousness. The raw authenticity he brought to the screen made him a perpetual misfit in Hollywood. He despised the pretense, and he could never forgive those who disrespected the craft or the true sacrifices made by real soldiers. This philosophical clash drove the list of 7 stars he refused to acknowledge. To Marvin, an honest silence and a firm refusal to participate were always preferable to a theatrical lie, and he carried this uncompromising, bedrock judgment onto every set, every social gathering, and every single contract negotiation he ever faced. From mercenary parts to the acclaimed centerpiece of major motion pictures, Lee Marvin quickly became the ace every director wanted. This led him to an inevitable collision course with the hero who never truly went to war. Blood and bone on Saipan. The silence of a soundstage was deafeningly phony compared to the sound of a real machine gun. The truth was simple. Lee Marvin was forged in a crucible of fire, not a Hollywood acting class. Before the cameras found him, he was a young man who enlisted for a distant, perilous call to duty in the Pacific. That experience, raw and brutal, became the bedrock of his legendary on-screen authenticity. The definitive education in 1942, Lee Marvin, barely 18 years old, enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He served in the Pacific Theater, culminating in the horrific battle for the island of Saipan in June of 1944. This tour was a permanent, unforgettable education in the terrifying, immediate human cost of conflict, teaching him a level of discipline, focus, and a sheer survival instinct that the transient nature of Hollywood celebrity could never hope to match. The grim reality of war was his only defining school for all future roles and performances. The price of survival. During a ferocious attack, Marvin was struck by machine gun fire an injury that forced his immediate evacuation. Of the men in his company who charged that day, most were lost in the fighting, a stark reality that would haunt him. He spent 13 months recuperating, eventually receiving the Purple Heart Medal. This award was proof of the sacrifice he made, the blood, the bone, and the emotional scars he left on the battlefield. He carried the heavy, solemn weight of his fallen comrade's memory every day, and this profound burden defined his sense of professional duty and fueled his deep skepticism of any easy or manufactured heroism presented under studio lights. The authenticity forged in fire for him, the constant fear, and the taste of metallic blood were not elements to be acted out. The silence of a sound stage, he realized, was deafeningly phony compared to the sound of a real machine gun. His inability to compromise stemmed directly from knowing the critical life and loss difference between cinematic peril and genuine survival. This raw, undeniable presence was his greatest asset, but also his greatest curse in a town built on charming lies. He was, by necessity and deep conviction, the only real tough guy in a town populated entirely by talented posers, a status he guarded with ruthless fidelity. The Purple Heart was earned, but stardom was not given. Next, we explore the strange twist of fate that led the former Marine to become an A-list ace. From Invisible Man to A-list ace. I don't need to pretend to be deep like he does. I just need to act real. For a time, he lived the life of an invisible man, drifting through odd jobs until fate intervened with an unscripted scene of its own. The pivotal moment. The turning point arrived when a local theater group suddenly found themselves short of one actor. Lee Marvin, with no formal training, was pulled in as a last-minute replacement. He stepped onto the stage. The result was an immediate explosion of raw, untamed energy. He was not acting. He was simply being. In that electric moment, he found a new way to channel the intense focus required for survival. And the audience felt the visceral, dangerous authenticity like a physical shock, instantly recognizing a genuine article they rarely experienced beneath the stage lights. The ascent to icon. From that unexpected debut, Marvin began his career playing villains. In 1953, he earned a notice in The Big Heat. His chilling casualness in these roles was drawn directly from the true villains he had encountered. In Bad Day, at Black Rock, a single glance from Marvin was enough to stretch the tension to its breaking point. The 1960s marked his transition to legendary status. He quickly became the reliable, indispensable cornerstone of any film requiring a character with genuine menace and grounded reality. A raw, powerful presence directors knew would instantly command the entire screen and elevate the project's credibility. The paradox of victory. Then came the crowning moment in Cat Ballou, 1965, earning him the Academy Award for Best Actor. His success was undeniable, yet that very victory made him a permanent misfit in Hollywood. The applause felt hollow and meaningless in comparison to the solemn camaraderie of a combat victory or the simple, hard-won respect of a soldier. He had built his legend on truth, setting him on a collision course with everyone who had built theirs on illusion. His gold Oscar statuette represented both his undeniable artistic triumph and his profound alienation from the very system that bestowed the fragile temporary honor. The Academy Award confirmed his status, but it also crystallized his disdain. Next, we examine his feud against the biggest cowboy in cinema, John Wayne, the man who shot Liberty Valance's pride. The ultimate validation of Lee Marvin's talent arrived with the double performance in Cat Ballou. Yet, this pinnacle of glory only sharpened his contempt for Hollywood's glittery veneer. The outsider status Marvin's approach was built on authenticity. His victory highlighted the difference between his truth and the elegant falsehoods that defined so many contemporaries. He felt like a true stranger at his own coronation, observing the unnecessary, elaborate theatrical rituals he was expected to perform, but resolutely refused to master or validate. The chasm created, he could not abide those who believed the spotlight entitled them to disrespect the work. This created a chasm between Marvin and the industry. His principled refusal to play the political game or compromise his raw, authentic standards made him a powerful but increasingly isolated and professionally controversial figure. The relentless engine. This demand for authenticity was the engine behind his famed list of 7 adversaries. He saw their unforgivable shared trait. They wore fame like a costume, and their arrogance allowed them to trample over professionalism. Marvin viewed these failings as personal insults to the struggle of art. To him, sacrificing a role was a necessary, non-negotiable act of preserving integrity, a principle far more valuable than any contract, industry approval, or millions of dollars. He would not sell his soul for any amount of silver. This set the stage for the most famous clash of his career, an unavoidable collision with the biggest cowboy in cinema. The true soldier was about to confront the hero who never truly went to war. The unshakable contempt. Lee Marvin's commitment to truth created an unbridgeable divide, a chasm of dignity. For Marvin, the issue was a visceral conflict between the raw authenticity of life and the calculated artifice of Hollywood. The uncompromising code. The 7 names on his list represented stars whose egos were so inflated they expected the world to orbit around them. For an actor to jeopardize a multi-million-dollar production with cavalier behavior was, in his eyes, an act of unforgivable selfishness. The list was a public declaration of war against the industry's ethical and artistic slide, a modern-day indictment written in stone and delivered without remorse or the slightest attempt at apology. The spectrum of sins. His scorn was spread across the 7 sins. False heroism, Wayne. Rotten ego, Sinatra. Silent pride, Lancaster. Idolized slack, Mitchum. Flawless artifice, Eastwood. Spotlight obsession, Brynner. And lounge act of vanity, Sir Curtis. He saw each star as embodying a different, equally corrosive form of the theatrical pretense he had sworn to fight, proving that fame corrupted equally across all genres and generations of Hollywood talent and critical achievement. To Lee Marvin, the soldier, this was a profound disregard for honor. He never regretted his feuds. He chose to live in the rawest, most unfiltered way, willing to be hated and misunderstood, as long as he remained true to himself. His truth was his armor and his weapon, in a town that dealt primarily in illusion, a powerful, disruptive reality few dared to acknowledge or successfully challenge face to face. And the man at the very top of his list, the one whose manufactured image represented the ultimate betrayal of the true soldier's code, was the biggest star of them all. If you're fascinated by Lee Marvin's uncompromising stand against Hollywood's biggest names, hit that like button and let us know in the comments which of these 7 feuds shocks you the most. The confrontation was inevitable, the real veteran versus the icon of American heroism. Next, we unveil the story of how Lee Marvin and John Wayne clashed in a defining, chilling moment that shattered the illusion of Hollywood's toughest cowboy. The cowboy who never went to war. The name John Wayne is forever tied to the image of the quintessential American hero. Yet to Lee Marvin, the man who had crawled through the trenches of Saipan, this iconic image was merely one giant performance, and a deeply offensive one at that. The personal clash. Marvin could never endure the presence of a cinematic hero who had never actually held a real rifle in a perilous conflict, the source of Marvin's bitterness. While World War II raged, John Wayne never enlisted. Wayne successfully postponed or dodged the draft and continued to build his image through safe, scripted scenes. This calculated avoidance of duty, while Marvin and countless others risked everything on foreign soil, was, to him, an eternal mark of profound dishonor that fundamentally tainted the integrity of every single role Wayne ever played on screen, no matter how iconic. The insult to honor Wayne's actions were a personal insult to the sacrifices made by those who did serve. He believed that the hero of the American screen had cheapened the honor of the uniform. For Marvin, who knew the real smell of fear and burnt cordite. Wayne's celluloid courage was an absolute lie, broadcast to millions of unsuspecting fans who deserved to know the terrible, authentic reality of war, a reality he had paid for in blood and unrelenting pain. The destined collision. The stage for their confrontation was the set of the Western film, The Comancheros. Marvin viewed Wayne as the archetypal symbol of the very fakery he had sworn to confront. This meeting was less about simply filming a Western, and more about a moral reckoning, decades in the making, a high-noon showdown set between two men who defined fundamentally different and completely irreconcilable realities of American masculinity and national service. The polite veneer was about to shatter. Next, we traveled to the tense set of the Comancheros to witness the raw, shocking moment when Lee Marvin stripped away the legendary facade of John Wayne with a chilling, unforgettable retort. The confrontation on the set of the Comancheros. The air on the set of the Comancheros was as heavy as the calm before a storm. It was a defining, unscripted scene where the line between reality and performance was violently erased. The command, John Wayne walked up to Marvin. "Lee, you're stealing the frame," he said, a casual instruction to diminish his powerful presence. "Tone down the intensity. Let the audience see me." This request, delivered by the bigger star, was the final, unforgivable straw for a man who believed intensity must always be earned through experience and never suppressed for the sake of a rival's fragile ego or the studio's political preference. The retort, Marvin did not laugh. He stared at Wayne with the unwavering gaze of a man who had crawled through blood-soaked trenches. Then Marvin removed his cowboy hat. He hurled it to the floor with a sound that echoed the finality of a closing coffin lid. Marvin then spoke with an icy tone. "You might play a soldier better than I do, but you will never know the smell of mud, the taste of blood, or the sound of bullets tearing over your head." Every single syllable was a carefully aimed weapon, striking directly at the heart of Wayne's constructed persona and exposing his ultimate protected vulnerability for all the astonished crew to witness the shattering of the legend. The aftermath. No one dared say a word. Wayne stood there, his famous smile frozen, his imposing frame suddenly still, as if the camera had jammed forever. Marvin's words were an immediate personal accusation of cowardice. In Lee Marvin's eyes, John Wayne was professionally finished. They were two entirely different worlds, separated by a chasm carved out of trust and dignity. The chilling silence that followed was louder than any director's command, confirming the profound moral defeat of the screen legend by the true veteran who valued life experience and sacrifice above all illusion and monetary success. The contempt was set in stone. Next, we examine the lasting consequence of that confrontation and how Marvin solidified his resolve to never again compromise his truth for the sake of a scene. The chasm of dignity. The confrontation on the set of the Comancheros resolved everything personally. The chasm of dignity separated Lee Marvin, the true veteran, from John Wayne, the manufactured icon, forever. The unspoken gulf. In Marvin's eyes, Wayne was professionally finished. The incident confirmed Lee Marvin's belief that Hollywood was willing to reward pretense, yet he refused to participate in the lie. The bitterness was rooted in the difference in their life experiences. This unwavering ideological purity dictated every single professional choice Marvin made for the rest of his illustrious career, making him both financially fearless and creatively unyielding to any pressure. The uncompromising decree. Marvin confided in friends during late, alcohol-fueled nights. He uttered his decree: "I'd rather hang up my gun and walk away from the screen than share a frame with a fake hero." He maintained his word, choosing integrity over the immense financial opportunities. He viewed his walk-off clauses not as demanding privileges, but as sacred declarations of self-respect in a town that routinely demanded moral surrender and professional conformity. The symbolic enemy. Wayne represented the worst of what Marvin despised: false heroism painted to look noble. The feud was a clear declaration that for Lee Marvin, the honor of the uniform and the honesty of the craft were paramount. His resolute refusal to work with Wayne became a silent but powerful political statement against the fundamental hypocrisy of the entire studio system and its manufactured icons. The conflict with John Wayne defined Marvin's moral compass, but it was just the beginning. We now turn our attention to the clash with the undeniable king of Hollywood's ego, Frank Sinatra. The farewell to the Duke. The clash between Lee Marvin and John Wayne was a defining moment where a moral line was drawn. For Marvin, the issue was permanently settled. He would never again allow his integrity to be compromised by sharing a stage with what he considered to be false heroism, painted to look noble. The final stance. Marvin's resolution to avoid John Wayne was unwavering. He became famous for his willingness to say no. Wayne represented the first kind of Hollywood enemy. Marvin could not abide the celebration of an actor who had skirted his duty. This formidable reputation for professional integrity became a powerful, non-negotiable bargaining chip that few others in the industry could match or afford to utilize. The pivotal shift. Marvin's subsequent feuds would pivot from false heroism to rotten ego. The next star on his list embodied the destructive power of unchecked celebrity arrogance. At the opposite end stood Frank Sinatra, so consumed by his own orbit that he thought entire film crews should bend to his schedule. Marvin once admitted that just hearing Sinatra's name was enough to make his blood boil, setting the stage for a fiery war of egos far louder than the silent grudge he held against the Duke. The raw, honest atmosphere of the battlefield was starkly replaced by the volatile, high-stakes power dynamics of an industry driven by narcissistic power and unforgiving self-interest. Frank Sinatra, king of the rotten ego. If Lee Marvin's feud with John Wayne was a cold war fought over honor, his clash with Frank Sinatra was a volcanic eruption fueled by pure, unadulterated contempt. Sinatra, the legendary singer, the box office titan, represented to Marvin the living embodiment of Hollywood's most corrosive sin, the rotten ego. The unprofessionalism Marvin never denied Sinatra's immense talent. His hatred was born from profound disdain for the arrogance that crossed the line into outright disrespect. Sinatra was famous for showing up late, leaving early, and demanding that entire productions halt. His sense of entitlement was a constant, costly insult to every working professional on the lot, consuming production time and millions of dollars with his entirely capricious and self-serving demands. The icy greeting. The crew waited for nearly half a day, but Sinatra was nowhere to be found. When he finally made his arrival, nearly 5 hours late, there was no apology, only an icy line. "Hope you've all been waiting long enough." Sinatra simply walked off the set, not feeling the vibe today. To Marvin, who understood life or loss stakes and the necessity of discipline, this cavalier attitude was nothing short of cinematic treason and a monumental dereliction of duty that fully warranted a physical response. The explosion for Lee Marvin. This was the definitive final straw. He stormed toward Sinatra, his eyes blazing with fury. At a glamorous Hollywood party, Marvin slammed his whiskey glass onto the table so hard it shattered and growled, "Frank thinks the world owes him a standing ovation, but he's never done a damn thing to deserve it." The very public, violent gesture was Marvin's powerful way of tearing down the velvet curtain hiding the star's ugly truth, turning the Hollywood gossip columns into a moral battleground of principles. Next, we examine the escalating war of words, the final, permanent snub, and how Frank Sinatra's pride led him to withdraw from one of the most iconic ensembles of the era, rather than face Marvin's contempt. The shattered glass. The explosive confrontation between Lee Marvin and Frank Sinatra escalated into a blazing public war of egos. Sinatra retaliated with sharp cruelty, reportedly sneering that the mutton uniform thinks he's noble just because he survived a war. This aimed directly to undercut the very foundation of Marvin's integrity by publicly mocking his greatest source of honor, his legitimate battlefield service. The final snub. The antagonism reached its climax during the casting for The Dirty Dozen. Sinatra dropped out, citing scheduling conflicts. However, the truth was widely whispered. Sinatra simply refused to share the screen with a genuine veteran. Sinatra's monumental ego could not risk being overshadowed or judged by Marvin's raw, authentic presence, forcing the chairman of the board to retreat from a major career opportunity. The king of ego chose to withdraw from a major role rather than endure Lee Marvin's unwavering, silent contempt. The ultimate dismissal from that moment on, Marvin never spoke Sinatra's name with respect again. When asked years later if he ever regretted the feud, Marvin's reply was cold. "I've faced machine guns and survived. But when I face Frank Sinatra, I feel absolutely nothing." This profound statement cemented Sinatra as an utterly inconsequential figure in the veterans' world, a man whose manufactured importance was completely unworthy of a single moment's genuine emotional energy or respect. Frank Sinatra represented the explosive war of egos. But Marvin's clash with the next star on his list was the complete opposite, a slow, cold, and poisonous conflict fought with intellect, influence, and silent snubs. Next, we explore the rivalry between Lee Marvin and the born star, Bert Lancaster, a battle of wills where both men believed only one truly deserved to stand at the center of the silver screen. The Dirty Dozen and the final snub. The collapse of the Sinatra-Marvin collaboration with the Dirty Dozen sealed their fate. The truth of the withdrawal. Sinatra abruptly dropped out. Yet, the truth was widely whispered. Sinatra withdrew because he would not, and could not, endure the presence of Lee Marvin, a genuine veteran. He sacrificed a major film role rather than face the daily reminder of Marvin's silent, unwavering contempt. The integrity of the set and the massive film budget were, ironically, protected only by Sinatra's overwhelming vanity and insecurity. The last word, this final, permanent snub, confirmed every negative assessment Marvin held. Sinatra was revealed to be insecure enough to flee a film set rather than share the spotlight with a man who prioritized honesty above fame. Marvin's code won the day, transforming the private animosity into a public demonstration of moral authority and artistic integrity that resonated throughout the entire industry. The conflict with Sinatra was a fiery public war of egos. But Marvin's clash with the next star on his list was the complete opposite, a slow, cold, and poisonous conflict fought with intellect and silent snubs. Next, we explore the rivalry between Lee Marvin and the born star, Bert Lancaster, a silent battle of wills where both men believed only one truly deserved to stand at the center of the silver screen. Bert Lancaster, Clash of the Silent Titans. If Lee Marvin's feud with Frank Sinatra was a blazing public war of egos, his clash with Bert Lancaster was a slow, cold, and poisonous conflict. This was a calculated struggle over status and pride, a silent battle of wills, where both men fundamentally believed only one truly deserved to stand at the center of the silver screen. The failed pairing. The feud began when Lancaster coldly refused to share a project, declaring that Marvin doesn't have the depth to carry a complex psychological role. Lancaster, the intellectual actor known for challenging roles, dismissed Marvin's visceral authenticity as merely brute force. Lacking the necessary technical polish and psychological complexity, he revered in dramatic art and critical acclaim. The artistic snub. That sentence was like a bullet fired straight into the pride of the veteran. Marvin set his whiskey glass down and fired back, "I don't need to pretend to be deep like he does. I just need to act real." This established the core ideological difference between the highly polished intellectual art of acting and the raw, unstudied art of living that ultimately defined Lee Marvin's unique contribution to cinema. The War of Wills rumors circulated that Lancaster, using his influence, quietly pressured a studio to reduce Marvin's role. Marvin simply withdrew from the film, leaving millions of dollars on the table. Later, Marvin turned down another project with Lancaster. If Lancaster's in the film, I'm not. This was a war of honor. The two men carved out two separate universes in Hollywood, each fundamentally unwilling to enter the other's orbit for fear of competitive overshadowing and ideological contamination. At lavish Hollywood parties, Lancaster would pointedly pretend not to see Marvin and once sneered, Some people act like they're shouting at the audience because they have nothing else to show. Marvin's response to Lancaster's calculated snub revealed the depth of his conviction. Next, we witness his chilling retort and examine how the silent rivalry was so destructive that studios preferred to lose millions rather than risk putting them in the same frame. The war of honor and influence. The silent feud between Lee Marvin and Bert Lancaster was a conflict fought with sheer force of will and calculated influence. For Marvin, the war of honor escalated the moment Lancaster dismissed his authenticity. The social warfare Lancaster would employ the silent snub, designed to wound Marvin's pride. On one memorable occasion, Lancaster made his disdain public, sneering, "Some people act like they're shouting at the audience because they have nothing else to show." The veteran's reply, Marvin did not respond with rage, but with a cold, measured retort. He turned to the crowd. "Maybe that's because I did shout on the battlefield, not on a stage," he replied. This exchange permanently shifted the nature of their rivalry. Marvin's chilling delivery exposed the intellectual vanity of his rival, transforming a petty social slight into a profound moral statement about earned credibility and the terrible price of real sacrifice. The studio risk. The hostility became so palpable that producers began to circulate warnings. Attempting to cast Marvin and Lancaster together was an act of studio folly. Studios would rather lose millions than risk the inevitable on-set collapse. The inability to contain these two towering, ideologically opposed egos cost the industry untold revenue, a clear, lasting testament to their mutual inflexibility and unwavering pride. If Lancaster drove him mad with ego, the next star on Marvin's list, the effortlessly cool Robert Mitchum, would push him over the edge for a much simpler reason. Next, we explore the explosive confrontation born from professional disdain, the infamous moment Lee Marvin slapped the idolized slacker right on set. Robert Mitchum, the idolized slacker. The Cold War with Bert Lancaster was an intellectual duel compared to Lee Marvin's clash with Robert Mitchum. This conflict was born from a simple, infuriating source: Mitchum's absolute lack of respect for the craft of acting. The offense Mitchum was known for showing up on set, having consumed alcohol, not knowing his lines, and openly admitting he simply did not care about the technical demands of filmmaking. This pervasive indifference was a direct insult to the professionalism Marvin revered as a necessity for production integrity and a complete disregard for the hundreds of people depending on him for the schedule. The slap on set. The tension reached its boiling point. Suddenly, Robert Mitchum committed the unforgivable. He fell asleep right there on set. Marvin did not hesitate. He walked over and slapped him across the face, hard enough to snap him immediately awake. "Wake up!" Marvin growled. "This is a film set, not a bar." The physical confrontation was a necessary act of discipline, delivered by the uncompromising professional to the self-indulgent star, a desperate measure to restore order and professional ethics. The retaliation Mitchum retaliated with lazy malice. On set, Mitchum deliberately changed his lines as the cameras rolled, ruining Marvin's performance and forcing the entire crew to reshoot. This act of sabotage was the final professional sin, cementing a permanent and irreparable break between the two men over their fundamentally opposed approach to professional work and respect. For Lee Marvin, this was a knife in the back. Next, we witness the dramatic aftermath as Marvin confronts Mitchum for his unforgivable lack of honor, and how this clash defined Mitchum as the idolized slacker, the man who valued his own cool image over the painstaking dedication of the craft. The scattered script. Robert Mitchum's deliberate sabotage was a devastating breach of professional honor. To Lee Marvin, this was an unforgivable offense. The eruption, the atmosphere on the set turned instantly to ice. The production ground to a halt. Marvin remained silent for a moment. Then he hurled his script to the floor. The pages scattered like shrapnel. "You think this is a joke?" he roared. "Dozens of people are working their utmost here. Hundreds of hours wasted, all because of one man who doesn't respect this craft." His voice was raw, with the authentic fury of a man who valued collective effort, schedule, and rigorous discipline over individual arrogance and professional sloth. The permanent war. Marvin stepped right up to Mitchum. This confrontation was about the very sanctity of the job. For Lee Marvin, this was a punch to his very belief in the craft of acting. Marvin's words were a declaration of permanent war. You want to sabotage the film? Fine, but don't expect me to forgive you, ever. After that defining day, Marvin's disdain for Robert Mitchum was absolute. He refused to speak to him. The professional distance between them became absolute. Lee Marvin's battles with Hollywood's elite reveal a man who never compromised. Which of these feuds resonates most with you? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts on the last real soldier of Hollywood. But Mitchum was not the last to make Marvin grit his teeth at Hollywood's machinery. The film industry was changing, and a new kind of star was rising. A cowboy who, in Marvin's view, basked in the spotlight without ever breaking a sweat, whose authenticity was entirely manufactured. The soldier's code was clear, but the times were shifting. Next, we explore the generational clash between Lee Marvin and the rising star Clint Eastwood. A meeting of two alpha wolves, who could not share the same pack, fought over the difference between real battle scars and flawless makeup. Clint Eastwood, the flawless new guard. As the 1960s drew to a close, Hollywood underwent a seismic shift. The era that valued the raw, perilous truth of a man like Lee Marvin began to give way to a new kind of star, the flawless new guard. This was embodied by Clint Eastwood, a younger actor whose cool, quiet demeanor represented a world that Marvin no longer recognized. The new style Eastwood rose to stardom through the stylized, minimalist brilliance of the spaghetti westerns. To Lee Marvin, who had survived gunfire, Eastwood's effortless success felt like an insult to the very essence of the craft. Marvin viewed his minimalist style as a profound lack of emotional commitment, a superficial preference for image over internal, grounded reality, which he deemed shallow and aesthetically deceptive. The confrontation on set. The two men were destined to meet on the set of Paint Your Wagon in 1969. Marvin glanced across the set and saw Eastwood, calmly fixing his hair in the mirror. Marvin fired off a cold, deliberate remark. A real cowboy doesn't comb his hair before a gunfight. This was a sharp slap at Eastwood's cool cowboy image. This clash highlighted the chasm between method, the quick, superficial look in the mirror, and motive, the deep-seated, authentic trauma of a real warrior. The finality. Eastwood generally avoided direct confrontation. Yet, he occasionally joked to close friends that some people still live in the past and will not move on from there. The two stars never appeared together in another project. To Marvin, Eastwood was simply the embodiment of a Hollywood that had fundamentally changed. It was a place where real scars had been replaced by flawless makeup, permanently sacrificing authentic grit for manufactured glamour and appealing aesthetic presentation. The clash with Eastwood was about image versus authenticity. But soon, Marvin would face a different kind of ego. A man whose every move was calculated. A star for whom acting was merely an excuse to feed his overwhelming vanity. Next, we explore the theatrical rivalry between Lee Marvin and Yul Brynner. A struggle where the only victory that mattered was standing directly in the center of the spotlight. Yul Brynner, the halo of the spotlight. If Clint Eastwood represented modern cool that Marvin found artificial, the next star on his infamous list, Yul Brynner, embodied a far more consuming sin, the obsession with the spotlight. Brynner was a phenomenon who treated every film set like a coronation ceremony. The superficial focused Brynner possessed undeniable magnetic charisma, but for Lee Marvin, who believed acting should be born from truth, Brynner's entire approach was a stunning betrayal of the craft. Brynner required lighting precise to the very angle, to the point where every shot had to feature a dramatic beam shining perfectly on his head. When a director dared to complain, Brynner simply shrugged. "The audience comes here to see me," he is famously reported to have said. The performance became entirely secondary to the perfection of his visual presentation, a move Marvin found professionally and ethically repugnant. Marvin's scorn. Marvin Watching this spectacle, could only scoff. I thought this was a film, not a lighting show, he would remark. Brynner's focus on superficial glamour was the ultimate offense. The declaration of war Brynner, in an act of staggering arrogance, reportedly refused to shake Marvin's hand. Instead, he made a chilling declaration: "You'll learn how to stand behind me." A few years later, Lee Marvin was offered a highly coveted lead role. When he saw Brynner's name included, Marvin quietly signed his withdrawal papers. For him, no role was worth standing in the shadow of a man who valued the spotlight over true substance. His financial sacrifice underscored his moral commitment to the integrity of the ensemble, a value Brynner consistently ignored for his own personal vanity. Marvin's scathing remarks about Brynner soon circulated. "He doesn't act," Marvin scoffed. He had defeated the king of the spotlight simply by refusing to stand in his light. The sins of John Wayne, Frank Sinatra, and Yul Brynner were rooted in ego and pretense. But the final actor on Marvin's infamous list represented something far worse in the soldier's mind: an unforgivable shallowness. Next, we witness Marvin's final, most contemptuous insult, aimed at the man he dismissed as the lounge act. Pretty boy, Tony Curtis, the perfect symbol of a film industry losing its way in a fog of vanity. Tony Curtis, the lounge act pretty boy. The final name on Lee Marvin's infamous list represented the culmination of everything he despised about modern Hollywood: an unforgivable shallowness and the triumph of vanity over virtue. That man was Tony Curtis, the poster child of glamorous cinema, whom Marvin dismissed with utter contempt as the lounge act pretty boy, the false image. Tony Curtis possessed the slick hair and a romantic persona. But for Lee Marvin, whose career was built on the raw, perilous truth of the world, Curtis was nothing more than a shiny coat of paint, hiding an unacceptable weakness underneath. In the 1960s, Marvin shot back. "Tony Curtis might survive Hollywood," he stated, "but he wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real fight." Marvin saw his fame as built entirely on superficial charm rather than genuine fundamental grit, a foundation he considered dangerously and inherently weak. The final confrontation. The tension escalated dramatically. Marvin could not resist delivering the insult straight to the handsome star. "He sprays on more perfume than the blood I've spilled on the battlefield," he quipped. The hostility ensured that any potential professional collaboration was doomed. When a major studio proposed they co-star, Marvin responded with 3 impossible demands. Curtis, furious, walked away, and the project collapsed. The collapse of the project was a direct and measurable result of Marvin's successful challenge to Curtis's carefully constructed, yet utterly vulnerable, professional facade. The last word. At a late-night party, a slightly inebriated Curtis attempted to strike back. "Some people have to shout," he jibed. Marvin delivered his final, cold-as-steel reply. "Maybe because I once shouted to stay alive, and you've never known what it means to fight." Tony Curtis completed the infamous list of 7. This final, complete list of Hollywood's great failures was the ultimate act of defiance from the soldier. But the final chapter of Marvin's life would ensure that his legacy was ultimately cemented not as a Hollywood star, but as the soldier he always truly was. Arlington, the soldier's final curtain. The 7 names on Lee Marvin's list were all giants of the cinema, yet they all shared the unforgivable traits of fakery, selfishness, and arrogance. Lee Marvin spent his entire career standing against that artifice, and in the end, he ensured his final act would be a definitive commitment to the truth he cherished. The final choice. In August of 1987, Lee Marvin drew his final breath after a sudden ailment. He departed as the veteran he had always fundamentally been. His final arrangements reflected this lifelong devotion to authenticity. He was laid to rest with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. The ultimate rejection. This decision was profound. Marvin chose to be buried not among the glamorous crypts of his peers, but among the rows of white headstones, the silent, solemn company of the comrades who had fallen on the battlefields of Saipan decades before. It was the ultimate, sincere rejection of the Hollywood machine. His grave serves as a permanent, quiet reminder of where his true allegiance lay and the sacred values he held above all industry honors, fleeting fame, and temporary celebrity. The legacy. At Arlington, the great star was interred under a simple military grave marker. This final image, a soldier resting silently among the thousands who had truly sacrificed, spoke volumes about the man he was. His legacy is one of profound commitment. He left behind something far deeper than iconic roles, the legacy of a man who never compromised with falsehood. He remains, in finality, the enduring embodiment of the authenticity he fought for, a hero whose toughness was forged in genuine fire, and whose word, even in death, was his absolute non-negotiable bond. Lee Marvin's story is one of unwavering integrity in a world built on illusion. If this video inspired you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another untold story from Hollywood's golden age. Share this with anyone who appreciates the real heroes behind the silver screen.